Hello and welcome to Why Does This Keep Happening to Me? Today we are talking about boundaries. And the name of the podcast today is Does This Belong in Your Suitcase? This is a really important topic because I deal with this daily in psychotherapy on an interpersonal level, as do all of you, although most of us are not aware that we are in constant confrontation of boundaries and different boundaries that come up in our life. So first, I want to just explain what is a boundary. A boundary is a line that marks the limits of an area. But in psychology, a boundary is a rule or limit that a person creates to identify reasonable, safe, and permissible ways for other people to behave towards you. And if a person violates that, a boundary is also part of how we respond to those boundary pushers. And so what's really necessary when we're talking about boundaries is to separate them into emotional boundaries and physical boundaries. Now, most people have a very good understanding of physical boundaries. This is just your own personal space and privacy. You know, if someone's standing too close to you, or, just kind of like inappropriately brushing your shoulder, it just feels kind of intrusive. Even looking at your personal information on your phone, in dating relationships, I've heard of that happening a lot. That's a physical boundary violation. But in terms of emotional boundaries, this is where I think a lot of people need some clarity. And so I like to use the suitcase analogy for people so that they can have a good visual representation of a boundary when you're trying to figure out if one of your boundaries is being violated. Think of this suitcase analogy, and that is that we each have our own personal suitcase. And in that suitcase are your feelings and your needs and your thoughts and all of you, and the responsibility that you carry for all of those things. And everyone has their own suitcase. The problem arises when we tend to pick up other people's stuff and put it into our suitcase. By that, I mean, when you take responsibility for other people's feelings, you take responsibility for other people's life choices. And this happens a lot, not only in parent-child relationships, but in romantic relationships. And so I think it's usually a lot more effective to discuss these things in terms of life examples. And so this comes up, I hear it daily with romantic relationships and friendships where there's this element of toxicity. We hear this term about toxic energy or toxic relationships. And how can you tell? How can you tell if you're in like a toxic relationship or a toxic friendship? And I think that the best way to be able to tell is to just pay attention to your emotions. Just pay attention to if you're around certain people. If you start to feel sort of tired, fatigued, irritable, uncomfortable, feelings of guilt or fear, these are all indicators that you're around an emotional vampire. So to further illustrate an emotional boundary, this is necessary to have a healthy relationship. This is not just, some psychological mumbo jumbo. This is necessary for you to have a healthy relationship with yourself and to have a healthy relationship for others. And the thing that you will hear me talk about repeatedly is the importance of living authentically, living from your authentic self. And you cannot live a healthy mental and physical life without living authentically. That's just my belief. There has to be a line between me and you, not allowing others to determine your thoughts, feelings, and needs, not blaming others for your thoughts, feelings, or behaviors, accepting responsibility for your choices, not blaming others for your problems, and also not picking up other people's their responsibility for their own behaviors and their own choices and problems. So this all sounds great, but why do we generally, most people have a hard time with boundaries? And I think that what stops people from consistently maintaining boundaries is that it's never been modeled to them. We learn these behaviors from our family, from our upbringing, and we observe how people assert their needs or not. If they are directly verbalizing or non-verbally expressing their needs, or if they're being avoidant or passive aggressive. So that fear of abandonment, rejection, discomfort of emotions, of uh, not wanting to feel guilty or anxious, comes up, and it blocks people from putting up boundaries. There's also always an underlying belief. And in my last couple of shows, I was discussing the importance of beliefs and how your beliefs create your reality. And so whenever a person has a hard time saying no, they're like what, people describe themselves as yes people, overextending their time, saying yes to things, feeling guilty for saying no. There's usually a belief beneath that. And the belief is usually having to do with something like, I can't make my own decisions, or my needs are not important, or it's not safe to say no, or perhaps I will be abandoned. I am not safe. And so, this is the time when you are feeling like you want to say no, but you're finding that you're not able to say no, to dig and figure out what that belief is beneath there. Usually I hear when I ask people, what prevented you from saying no? You didn't want to do that thing. And they will say, I didn't want to hurt their feelings, or I felt guilty. And so essentially what happens is what you're saying is that the other person's feelings are more important than your feelings. And this is where people come up against burnout and resentment. They bottle everything up, and then these issues come up in relationships because their needs are not being met. So physical boundaries we talked about. The emotional boundaries, I think we should spend the rest of our time talking about, because these are the ones that are not as apparent. I think people don't realize how much emotional boundaries cover. And it's not only emotions and energy, but it's also time. Being aware of giving up your time and feeling overextended, doing things you don't want to be doing, and being places you don't want to be. This is a boundary violation. You are not protecting your boundaries. So let's just take an example of a relationship. I remember I had a friendship, a 20-year friendship, and there is this belief that when this friend of mine, if she's going through something difficult, if I'm not there for her at the drop of a hat, right, that I'm not a good friend. And that's just not true, because we each have limits, to our time, to our energy. We have to engage in self-care before we engage in taking care of others. You cannot take from an empty well. So our job is to fill our well, fill ourselves up, and then from there we can help others. I've heard a lot with dating relationships. I've heard people say things like, I will do anything to make this person happy. Like it's my job to keep that person happy. It is absolutely not your job to keep somebody happy. That doesn't belong in your suitcase. I've heard people say that, I just don't have any time left for myself. I don't have enough time to exercise, or I don't have enough time to meditate. And that could be true, possibly. But at the same time, most of the time, you don't have time because you're not believing that you are worthy of that time. You are giving your time to others and other people and other things before you are giving your time to you. And so I often ask people when they say this to me, Are you as important as the person you're giving your time to? And this is difficult when there are children involved or elderly parents, people take care of, how to put that time for yourself in there. But it, again, if you are sick and you are not taking care of yourself, you're no good to anybody. So this is a boundary issue as well. I've also heard a lot of people say to me, I'm not really happy in this relationship, but that person would fall apart without me. That doesn't belong in your suitcase, doesn't belong to you. If I just took more time to make this relationship better, it would be that it takes two people and it doesn't all fall on you. So, there's a lot of this discounting when things are not going well because of the few times things are going well. And so, people, again, going back to the authenticity, being committed to your happiness, being committed to your self care, being able to consistently um, and clearly state your boundaries and put up the line in the sand. And when people cross those boundaries, maintaining and being consistent with what you are willing to give and what you're willing to not give. And so, okay, how do we do this? So, committing to letting go of fixing others is one big step. I feel like a lot of times I see people that are fixers. They just want to fix other people. My husband often told me that I attract broken birds. And, that's not like a judgment on others, but when I was much younger, I did tend to attract people into my life that I felt driven to fix. And that wasn't my job, not my job to fix people in relationships. And a lot of people end up in these dynamics where they're feeling powerless. And if only they did a little bit more, they could fix somebody. Um, Being rescuers, that's another thing, rescuing others, that comes up a lot in sessions. Needing to be needed, that comes up. If you notice that, sometimes finding yourself in a relationship that you're not being fulfilled or satisfied in, but there is this pull of being needed, and being needed is a very big motivator for people. Changing yourself to be liked, depending on other people's approval. This is another area people get stuck in with boundary violations, just allowing people to pull them into saying yes to things that they don't necessarily want to be saying yes to, because they're looking for other people's approval. So, to start with setting boundaries, I think it is important to just start noticing how you feel. Notice any discomfort that comes up for you with certain people, like these energy vampires I was talking about, where you leave, meeting a person. That happens to me often, where, I'm around a person and I would go home and I would feel energized versus going home and feeling completely depleted. When you go home from seeing a friend or partner, uh, you know, or a coworker, and you feel depleted, that is an indication that that person is violating a boundary in some way. Some kind of boundary has been crossed. And it's not that they have necessarily tried to do this, but it's that you have allowed them to do this. People will not do anything in terms of, emotional boundaries that you do not allow them to do. So imagine that this is like your own invisible force field and that you are in charge of protecting it. So to start with, just notice in the moments when people ask you to do something, saying no. So just say no to tasks that you don't want to do or you don't have time to do. And if you're having a hard time saying no, it's really important to sit with why, just asking yourself what the fear is behind saying no. And this is where a few therapy sessions could be really beneficial for people to just have someone else see your blind spot, because we all have a blind spot. Saying yes to help. So if you feel like you're taking on the responsibility of taking care of everybody's needs, asking for help, saying thank you with no apology or shame, Delegating tasks. This is another one where people just want to do everything themselves. Just delegate. Protect your time. Don't overcommit. Ask for space. We all need our own time, and time is a really big thing that we give away without realizing that we are actually giving away a very precious commodity, and we're crossing our own boundary. Speak up if you feel uncomfortable with how somebody is treating you, or just simply not allowing it anymore. And by not allowing it, that sometimes means ending relationships, ending friendships, because people learn how you teach people how to treat you. And so if you've taught a person how to treat you over the last several months or years, and then all of a sudden you start saying no because you're realizing that, you know what, I've been putting out allowing this person to come into my boundaries for way too long, that's not going to be easy, because that other person has grown accustomed to the way that you have allowed them to be with you. And so it is very difficult to create a new pattern with people we have been in long relationships with. And there's a lot of resistance. And so you need a lot of support. And oftentimes it marks the beginning of the end, or other times it marks the beginning of a much better relationship if both people are committed to having a healthier dynamic. So honor what's important to you. Choose to put yourself first. Drop the guilt, drop the shame. These are all learned things. And, also another boundary violation is like sharing way too much personal information too quickly. This happens a lot in dating relationships as well. So it has to be this mutual give and take, this mutual, not leaving and feeling that you have allowed someone to come into all of your personal information and not gotten anything in return. And, so we're all, like I said, have our little suitcase, and just, noticing if your suitcase feels a bit heavy, if you're feeling a bit heavy, a bit burdened, perhaps you're carrying other people's stuff, you're carrying other people's failures, you're carrying other people's successes, and it's not really yours to carry. Or perhaps you're bitter and angry because of a failure of yours that you're blaming someone else for. That doesn't belong to them. That belongs to you. So, this is just a beginning to start to really understand what boundaries are, how they show up, and that a healthy relationship is not possible without protecting and maintaining consistent emotional and physical boundaries. In a healthy relationship, you will feel calm, safe, and respected unconditionally, whether you say no or yes. And, so if there's a fear that if you say no, you'll be abandoned or rejected, you're probably not meant to be in that relationship. It's a lesson, but not meant to stay in that uneven relationship dynamic. So start thinking about all of these issues and how they're showing up into your life. Make a commitment to yourself to put your own identity, needs, feelings, and goals first. Commit to letting go of fixing others. Take responsibility for the outcome, not taking responsibility for the outcome of other people's choices. Not making your job to save and rescue others, or needing to be needed, or changing yourself to be liked, or depending on other people's approval. Just really contemplate what I'm saying to you, because I have seen people change in such amazing ways once they just realized that they were saying yes to so many things that they did not want to be saying yes to. I remember years back, I was seeing a client in therapy, and she was really anxious. And she's from the South. She's from I believe South Carolina, Georgia, around there. And she would tell me, I have been taught not to say no, the Southern hospitality. And so what would happen is at work, people would come to her and ask her to do things that were not in her job description. And it had become a routine that everybody would come to her and she would do everybody's job, and she was burning out and she was depressed, and she'd go home and she'd have to drink a bottle of wine just to feel better. And we started talking about this concept of the suitcase analogy. And does it belong in your suitcase? Does it belong in their suitcase? And she started realizing that very few things that she was taking on actually belonged to her. And so what she did is she thought of this on her own. I thought it was so brilliant. She went home and she typed up, um, printed up this paper and got it laminated. And on it, it said, "It doesn't belong to me." And she taped this up on her cubicle at her job. And initially, because the guilt would come up when she'd say no, she would point to this little sign. People would come and say, "Oh, can you get me so and so report?" And she'd point to the sign, "Doesn't belong to me." And, at first people are kind of like taken aback, like, "What do you mean? You always do this for me." And so we spent several weeks working on the guilt, the inevitable guilt that kept coming up. And sure enough, after a few weeks, she came in and she said, "I think I'm done with therapy. I no longer feel guilty. I actually point to that sign, I say it, and I feel proud and I feel energized to say, this doesn't belong to me." And as a result, some of these behaviors that we're working on decreasing go down on their own when we start taking care of ourselves and being more authentic. So as a result, her drinking decreased. She never felt the need to go home. She didn't feel the need to go home and have a bottle of wine every night because she was meeting her needs. She wasn't pushing them down and ignoring them and living with this feeling of disempowerment. Okay. So just think about in your life the people that are blaming you for their choices, that you feel responsible for fixing, that you feel responsible for maintaining their emotional balance. It is not your job. It is not to be in your suitcase. And when they give it to you, it is your choice whether you decide to pick it up or not. You do not have to pick it up. I remember when I was thinking of this, doing this podcast, this topic, I was driving home one day and I was watching this lady walking up to her front door. She was going up a bunch of steps to go to her front door. And she had probably like 20 bags of groceries, right? So she was trying to carry all 20 bags of these groceries up these steps. And, one of them fell, another one broke. There were oranges falling down the street. She was all flustered and trying to gather everything up. And I was just looking at her like, how many of us feel like that on a daily, where we're just, feeling bogged down by all of the other people's things that we are carrying that we do not have space for and that do not belong to us. So I watched her. I was in a red light. And she kind of like put everything down. She took like 4 bags, put them into her house, came back, took 4 more bags, took them into her house. And, it's kind of like that. Sometimes, you want to help somebody, but you just can't in that moment. Maybe you need to take those 20 bags out, but in that moment, it's not physically possible. So you have to say, you know what? I want to help you, but I just can't right now. I just can't. And the word no is a very powerful word, and it's also a complete sentence. So please think about this. And, if you have any stories or any questions, feel free to email me at office@delraypsych.com. Thank you so much for listening. And I want to say that this podcast is sponsored by Delray Psych and Wellness. We are a private practice in Alexandria, Virginia. And thank you so much for listening. Goodbye.